Story 1. The Intruder Incident. Late at night on October 29, 2021, I lived on the outskirts of town where the surroundings were quiet and desolate. That night, I was woken up by a loud banging on my door. It was to the inn. I crawled out of bed, my heart pounding wildly. The knocking continued, becoming more frantic. I approached the door and looked through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. Suddenly, a low voice rang out, claiming to be the police and demanding that I open the door. I didn't immediately believe it. Instead, I felt an overwhelming fear and suspicion. I quickly retreated to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I explained the situation to the operator and requested confirmation if there were any officers at my address. A few seconds later, the operator's response chilled me to the bone. No officers were at my address. Terrified, I hurriedly locked all doors and windows and turned off all the lights. The knocking stopped, but I could still sense someone outside the door. My heartbeat and breathing sounded unnaturally loud in the darkness. A few minutes later, I heard sirens growing closer. The real police had finally arrived. I heard footsteps outside, followed by knocking again, but this time it was the voice of a police officer. Trembling, I opened the door and saw two officers standing outside. They checked around the entire house, but found no sign of any suspicious person or evidence. The police told me it might have been a prank, but they would increase patrols in the area to ensure safety. However, I couldn't shake off the unease. I felt that the intruder that night wasn't just a prankster. For safety, I installed several security cameras and began meticulously checking every entry and exit point. A few days later, I reviewed the security footage and discovered a chilling scene. In the footage from that night, a tall, dark figure appeared at my doorstep. Though its face was obscured, it was clear that it wasn't a human silhouette. The shadow lingered at the door for a few minutes, seemingly peering around, then quietly left. A chill ran down my spine. This discovery further convinced me that the intruder that night was no ordinary human. Since then, I frequently felt the sensation of being watched. When I was alone at home, I always felt a pair of eyes lurking in the shadows. Sometimes I heard strange noises, like whispers or footsteps, but whenever I checked, there was nothing. One night, while watching TV, I suddenly heard heavy footsteps upstairs. I distinctly remembered being home alone and panic setting. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a kitchen knife, and slowly approached the stairs. As the footsteps grew closer, my heartbeat quickened. I cautiously ascended the stairs, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the second floor, the sounds abruptly stopped, and an overwhelming tension filled the air. I looked around but saw nothing. However, the feeling of being watched intensified, as if something was lurking in the shadows observing me. I didn't dare stay long. I quickly went downstairs, locked all doors and windows, and turned on all the lights. A few nights later, I was again woken up by knocking. This time, the knocks had an eerie rhythm, as if conveying some message. I felt extreme unease but still observed through the peephole. This time, I saw a pale face pressed against the door, eyes staring directly into the peephole. The face was lifeless, like a corpse. I stumbled back, barely able to breathe. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again. The operator's voice calmed me down a bit, but the image of that face was etched deeply in my mind. A few minutes later, the police arrived, but this time they brought more advanced equipment. They used thermal imaging equipment to scan around the house but still found nothing suspicious. The police advised me to temporarily leave the house and stay with a relative or friend for a few days. I decided to take their advice, packed my essentials, and temporarily moved to a friend's house. However, the feeling of unease didn't disappear. I always felt that something was watching me from the darkness, waiting for the right moment. A few days later, I returned home and found that the security footage had captured the shadow again. This time, its movements were more deliberate, seemingly trying to unlock the door. I felt an intense fear and helplessness. I began to suspect that the intruder wasn't an ordinary human but some supernatural entity. Despite all the security measures I had taken, the feeling of being watched persisted. Every night, I couldn't sleep soundly and always woke up in fear. The intruder seemed omnipresent, constantly watching me. All I could do was pray, hoping that this nightmare would end soon. However, the presence of this intruder seemed like a never-ending nightmare, trapping me within, unable to escape. Story 2. Kidnapping in Bali. It was a summer vacation I could never forget, a shadow in my childhood. I was only 10 years old that year, traveling to Bali with my family. It was supposed to be a wonderful trip, but things went completely wrong. We stayed in a friend's villa, surrounded by dense jungle. Although the scenery was beautiful, it always gave a faint sense of unease. That night, we were having a party with friends, celebrating a holiday. The adults were drinking and chatting in the living room, while I played in the yard with a few other kids. Suddenly, a strange man appeared in the yard, dressed in tattered clothes, with a malicious smile on his face. He approached us, speaking in a language we didn't understand. Instinctively, we felt scared and started running towards the house. However, he was faster than us, grabbing my arm and dragging me into the depths of the jungle. I struggled desperately and screamed for help, but the adults' laughter drowned out my cries. The other children scattered in fear. He took me to an abandoned hut filled with the smell of decay and dark corners. He tied me to a chair with rope, muttering something constantly. I watched him in horror, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. For the next few weeks, I was imprisoned in that hut, living a life of darkness and despair. He fed me moldy bread and dirty water, sometimes beating me brutally. His eyes were filled with madness and rage, as if he could erupt at any moment. One night, strange whispers came from the jungle outside, like someone was murmuring. I felt an inexplicable fear but also a glimmer of hope, hoping someone was coming to rescue me. Suddenly, the hut's door was kicked open, and a tall figure appeared in the doorway. In the moonlight, I saw a woman with long hair draped over her shoulders, her face pale as a ghost. She didn't speak, just looked at me with those hollow eyes. The man also heard the commotion and rushed in. When he saw the woman, his face turned ashen, and he let out a scream, fleeing into the jungle. The woman watched his retreating figure, a strange smile on her face, then slowly walked towards me. She untied the ropes binding me with her cold fingers, without making a sound. I felt a chill but still followed her out of the hut. Under the moonlight outside, the jungle looked even more eerie and terrifying. She led me through the jungle to a small village. The villagers saw us and showed terrified expressions, avoiding her gaze. She took me to a small house at the end of the village, then disappeared into the darkness. I knocked on the door, and an old man opened it. He was surprised to see me and asked how I got there. I told him my story, and he sighed, saying that the woman was a spirit from their village, once a kidnapping victim herself. The old man gave me food and water and let me rest for the night. The next day, he took me to the police station to report the incident. The police listened to my story and quickly launched a search operation. They found the hut in the depths of the jungle, but the man who kidnapped me was nowhere to be found. Months later, the police finally caught the kidnapper. He was arrested for continuing his crimes but his eyes still held madness and fear. In court, he claimed he was being hunted by a female ghost and had to keep kidnapping to ensure his own safety. The kidnapping had a profound impact on me and my family. Although I was rescued and returned to normal life, the dark and terrifying experience left an indelible mark on my heart. Sometimes, I still see the spirit of that woman in my dreams, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Although she saved me, I can never forget her paper-white face and hollow eyes. This experience made me realize that there are many things in the world we cannot explain. The woman's spirit seemed to be warning us that evil deeds will be punished and the innocent souls are waiting for justice to come. That winter, my friend Jack and I decided to take a vacation in a remote small town. We rented an old villa, which was once a rich merchant's estate, but had been abandoned later. We wanted to experience an unusual holiday, but little did we know, this vacation would become the most terrifying experience of our lives. We arrived at the villa in the evening. As the sky darkened and the cold wind howled, the entire villa looked eerie and terrifying. We walked into the hall and were immediately enveloped by an old and eerie atmosphere. Faded portraits hung on the walls, furniture was covered with dust, and the floor creaked under our feet. The first night, we decided to go to bed early. Jack and I each chose a bedroom. My room had an old four-poster bed and a worn-out wardrobe. Lying in bed, I felt a chill, as if a sense of foreboding. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a faint tapping sound. I got up to check and found the room empty. The tapping seemed to come from the wardrobe. I slowly approached and opened it, finding only some old clothes. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed from the pile of clothes and quickly disappeared into the corner. I stepped back in fright, my heart racing. The next morning, I told Jack about it. He laughed and said I might have had a nightmare, but I was sure it wasn't a dream. We decided to go to the town library to look up some information about the villa. The librarian, an elderly woman, told us that the villa had a sinister history. It was said that the original owner of the villa mysteriously disappeared many years ago, and his family members died one by one under strange circumstances. The townspeople believed that the villa was cursed by an evil spirit, and those who entered it would eventually meet misfortune. Hearing this, we felt a chill. Back at the villa, we decided to explore the basement for clues. The basement door was in the corner of the hall, rusty and old. It took a lot of effort to open it. The basement was dark and damp, with the smell of decay in the air. We illuminated the surroundings with flashlights and found strange symbols and drawings on the walls, with abandoned furniture and garbage piled on the floor. Suddenly, we heard whispers, as if someone was speaking right next to us. We turned around to find the source of the sound but saw nothing. Jack suggested we leave the basement and go back to our rooms. That night, we both felt uneasy and had trouble sleeping. I heard the tapping sound again, more frequent and urgent this time. I got up to check and saw the dark shadow again, this time standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with cold eyes. I screamed in terror, and Jack rushed in, but the shadow had already vanished. We decided not to stay in the villa anymore and left the next morning. However, the strange things didn't end there. After returning home, I found strange scratches on my body and heard whispers and tapping sounds every night. Jack also started showing similar symptoms, and our mental state worsened. We saw doctors and underwent various tests but found no cause. We began to suspect that the dark shadow from the villa had followed us home. To escape this nightmare, we decided to return to the villa once more to find the source of the dark shadow. We contacted a professional medium, hoping she could help us. After hearing our story, the medium agreed to assist us. We returned to the villa, and the medium performed a series of rituals in the house. She said the dark shadow was a cursed soul that required an exorcism to be completely eliminated. Halfway through the ritual, a sudden gale swept through the villa, and all the lights went out. In the darkness, we heard deep growls and sharp laughter, as if countless souls were wandering around us. The medium continued chanting until the wind gradually subsided and the lights came back on. She told us the dark shadow had been expelled, but we had to leave the villa and never return. We quickly packed our bags and left the villa. After returning home, our symptoms gradually disappeared and life returned to normal. However, that terrifying experience left a deep shadow in our hearts. Even after many years, I still often dream of that dark shadow and the eerie villa. I know some places should not be ventured into lightly, as they harbor too many dark forces beyond our comprehension. It was an ordinary weekend when my friends and I decided to go fishing by the lake. We chose a remote lake, far from the city's hustle and bustle, with beautiful scenery. We brought our fishing gear and food, planning to spend a peaceful night by the lake. By the time we arrived at the lake, the sun was starting to set, and the water glowed golden under the setting sun. We found a flat spot, set up our tents and the grill. As night fell, the surroundings grew quiet, and we could only hear the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. We sat by the lake and started fishing. The night was deep, and the moonlight on the lake made it look particularly mysterious. Suddenly, my fishing line jerked violently. Excited, I pulled up the rod and found a strange fish. The fish was completely black, with eyes that glowed red, looking very eerie. My friends gathered around, curious and uneasy about the strange fish. None of us had ever seen such a fish, but we decided to keep it in a bucket for now. As time went on, the atmosphere by the lake grew increasingly eerie. We occasionally heard low wailing sounds from a distance, as if someone was crying. Late at night, we decided to go to sleep. Lying in my tent, I couldn't sleep, with thoughts of the strange fish running through my mind. Suddenly, I heard faint footsteps outside the tent, as if someone was wandering around. I got up to check and found no one outside, but the black fish was gone. I went back to the tent, trying to sleep, but the ominous feeling wouldn't go away. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a scream. Rushing out of the tent, I saw one of my friends lying on the ground, pale, pointing towards the lake, saying something had crawled out of the water. We were all terrified and grabbed our flashlights, shining them towards the lake. In the beam of light, we saw a blurry figure slowly walking towards us. The figure looked like a person but emitted an inhuman aura. We shouted, trying to scare it away, but the figure didn't stop. It got closer, and we finally saw it clearly. It was a woman covered in algae, with pale skin and hollow eyes. Black liquid dripped from the corners of her mouth, and her steps were stiff and heavy. Terrified, we turned to run, but the surrounding trees seemed to move, blocking our path. The woman slowly approached, and we kept retreating. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream, and the temperature around us dropped sharply, with a thin mist rising from the lake. One of my friends bravely picked up a branch, trying to drive her away. But the woman suddenly vanished into the mist, and the next moment, she appeared behind us, grabbing his shoulder with a cold hand. He screamed and fell to the ground, his eyes filled with terror. Seeing this, the others immediately ran to the car, trying to escape this eerie place. I ran desperately too, filled with despair. We finally got into the car, started the engine, and quickly drove away from the lake. None of us spoke on the way back, our hearts filled with fear. After returning to the city, we told the police about the incident, but they found no clues. The lake became a taboo for us, and no one dared to go there again. Months later, my friends began to show strange symptoms. Some had insomnia, some experienced hallucinations, and some even went mad for no reason. I often dreamed of that woman covered in algae, her gaze following me in my dreams. We saw doctors trying to find the cause, but all tests came back normal. We had to accept the fact that the fishing trip had brought back a curse, and this curse was gradually devouring our lives. To escape the nightmare, I began researching legends about the lake. I found that the lake used to be the center of a village, but decades ago, the village was destroyed in a fire. It was said that the fire was caused by a fisherman's wife who committed suicide by the lake, her resentment causing the fire. Knowing this, my friends and I decided to return to the lake and try to lift the curse. We found a medium, hoping she could help us. After hearing our story, the medium agreed to help but warned us that it would be very dangerous. On a moonless, windy night, we returned to the lake. The medium started her ritual, and we sat around the fire filled with fear and hope. Halfway through the ritual, a thin mist rose from the lake again, and the woman's figure gradually appeared. The medium chanted incantations, trying to calm her resentment. But the woman suddenly screamed and lunged at the medium. The medium was knocked to the ground, but managed to finish the last incantation. As the incantation ended, the woman's figure began to dissipate, and the lake returned to calm. We quickly helped the medium up. She told us the curse had been lifted, but we must never approach the lake again. Grateful, we left the lake, finally finding some peace in our hearts. Despite this, the experience left a deep shadow in our hearts. Whenever it was late at night, I couldn't help but think of that woman covered in algae, her gaze seeming to watch me in the darkness. We knew that some places' secrets should never be disturbed, as they harbor too many dark forces beyond our comprehension. Even after many years, I still often dream of that woman covered in algae and the eerie lake. I know some places should not be ventured into lightly, as they harbor too many dark forces beyond our comprehension.